Hey everyone, so this is Evan Gudmestead, and I'm trying a new approach of video-based lectures with JavaScript, with the hope that writing more of the code versus just talking about it helps people understand it better. And so I'm going to use the PowerPoints that we typically go through as a guide to these video lectures. Um, However, the hope is that we open up our editor and we're writing more code than just talking about it. Okay, so this being the first chapter, I almost didn't do a video lecture because in comparison to the other chapters, um, there's not a whole lot of code in comparison, but I am going to try and write as much of it as I can. The nice thing about the first chapter, and the reason why I think we can go through it relatively fast compared to the other chapters, is a lot of it just covers the things that we just got done, covering in HTML. I mean, the history of the World Wide Web. Well, that was chapter 1 of our last book. And I realized with this particular class, we skipped that first chapter. So if you feel gypped, if you feel like I didn't get to understand the history, well, this is your chance, okay? But again, I'm not a big proponent of learning the history as much as I am just writing code. So I don't know how much time we're going to spend talking about it here. We are going to, again, review. This says describe. I think it should say review the difference between client and server-side scripting, because we've talked about those things before. And I think at this point everyone has a general idea that those are two different things that operate differently. We're going to get into writing our first JavaScript. We're going to add some JavaScript to a web page and talk about a little bit about the structure of a JavaScript programming. So just kind of jumping right in. History, there you go. One name in this industry that you should be familiar with is Tim Berners-Lee. He is the single individual that's given credit for developing the World Wide Web, which is how we transmit information across using HTTP. We create web pages, and then web browsers read our web pages. So this guy here, Tim Berners-Lee, he's an important name to know, and so I guess if there's one thing on this slide, he's kind of the pioneer of the World Wide Web. But it's not just him. And from what I have read, there's a lot of people that go into creating the World Wide Web. However, this guy is always the one, given the credit for it. Whereas Steve Jobs is a huge name in technology, or was a huge name in technology. Bill Gates is a huge name in technology. Mark Zuckerberg is a huge name in technology. This individual was more fundamental in what we do today and how we use the World Wide Web than any one of those individuals you could argue. Okay, as far as specifically the World Wide Web. Okay, so he should just be another name in technology that everyone should be familiar with. Realizing that the World Wide Web and the Internet are two different things. The Internet refers to the hardware. The Internet refers to the routers that are all cabled together using Ethernet cables and fiber cables, right? That's the Internet. The web is how we share information. We know what a web page is. We know what a URL is, or a URI, a Uniform Resource Identifier. So just some basic terminology here. You put a bunch of individual web pages together. You make it live on the web. It's a website. We use web browsers to view those. And we put our websites on web servers. Okay, a web server, it might be a Windows server or a Linux-based server in which you install a web server piece of software. For example, on Windows, if you install IIS, and you guys all did that in first semester, right? Did you not install IIS? You installed IIS in first semester, and then when you installed IIS, your computer becomes a web server. It can host web pages. Okay, so if you didn't know that, that's how you do it. You take your Windows 7 machine or your Windows 10. In the real world, you're talking Windows Server 2008 or 2012. You put your website on there. When you install IIS, it's a piece of software, and it can then deliver web pages to your web clients. Oh my gosh, okay. First web browser, believe it or not, and I guess I'm going into more of the history than I thought I would, but it's a video. I'm going to be a little bit thorough here. First web browser developed at the University of Illinois, right? So for all you Mizzou fans out there, we got one up on you there. It eventually evolved into Netscape Navigator, which today Netscape evolved into Firefox. So the browser that we know as Firefox originated way back here in '93 in the University of U of I. Microsoft Internet Explorer, 1996, which is when it was created. How many people were not born by 1996? Okay, get a good showing, about 5 or 6 hands. Okay, a lot of people weren't even born at this point. There is a term on this slide, DHTML, which in large part is not something that is so common anymore. DHTML stood for dynamic HTML, and it really just meant when you start interacting with JavaScript. Like you add JavaScript to your HTML. We don't call it DHTML anymore. We just call it HTML and JavaScript. So this term was kind of a thing for a while, but if you see it out there, just realize it just means, okay, HTML and JavaScript working together. In '94, the W3C came together, started making web standards, and today, really Google Chrome, Firefox, and IE are your major browsers. IE, since this PowerPoint, has now been rebranded as what? IE is now known as Edge. It's actually a separate browser, but it's really just a branding thing. And from the feedback I've gotten from industry, Edge is a lot better. Edge has been a lot better. They've made significant improvements, at least as far as being compliant with web standards. Hey, you guys know how to create HTML. That's what your midterm was just over. HTML was based on an older language called SGML, Standard Generalized Markup Language. I don't know that we covered that or not, but it was a set of rules and regulations like, hey, you have an opening tag, you close it, and those kinds of things. What a tag is based on SGML. Okay, and you know this, right? You know this HTML syntax. You know some of these basic tags. Here we have just a basic HTML page. We know that we're going to use a text editor like brackets to write some HTML. We use brackets as far as our text editor. Many years ago, we just simply used Notepad++. HTML5 is our most current version. And that brings us into the next section. So again, a lot of that was history and basics of HTML. I think you guys should be pretty comfortable with that at this point. Haven't written any code yet because I haven't seen anything to write, but we will. Talking about a client-server architecture. Again, I think this is review. At least I hope it's review. The client is your computer, is your desktop. It's your laptop. It's your mobile phone. It's your tablet. Whatever is accessing the resource is the client. Whatever hosts the resource is the server. So realize client server, that's a relationship. Okay, it's not always the case. I'll give you an example. If I take my Windows 10 machine and I host a file on it, and any one of you were to access that file, maybe it's a web page, your computer would be the client, my computer being the host would be the server. Okay? Reverse those roles. Now, if you have a file on your machine and I access the file on your machine, my machine becomes the client, your machine becomes the server. So client server is a relationship, and those relationship statuses can change. Who is the client and who is the server? But generally, who hosts the resource is the server, who accesses the resource is the client. Okay? In the case of the World Wide Web, the web server is the server, and the client is whatever device you're on that's accessing the website. Okay? The languages that we have learned so far, HTML and CSS, those are client-side languages, meaning they get passed down to the client, and then your browser, whether it's Internet Explorer or Chrome, it renders the HTML. The rendering is the work, meaning it draws your HTML to the screen, right? The rendering takes place on the client. That's why it's a client-side language. JavaScript is also client-side. Okay, so when I say JavaScript, realize I like to call it vanilla JavaScript because it's just the bland, the basic JavaScript that's been around since the 90s. Okay, I'm not talking about any of the new, like we're going to talk about React, the React framework later on in this course. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about vanilla JavaScript. And the backend typically that's where the database is held. So if you have a website that interacts with data, the backend could handle your logins for your websites, so valid usernames and passwords. The backend could handle e-commerce, so purchasing something online, like shopping carts. Backend could handle how do you upload a file to Facebook, like a picture. How do you upload a picture to Facebook? Well, it's going to be some back-end code that can take a picture off of your computer and save it on a server. Okay, that's a difference between a client language like JavaScript and a back-end language like C# or Java, one of those. Okay, basic. The client says, give me a web page, and the server responds with that web page. It's actually a little bit more complex than that because your client would ask the processing tier. The processing tier, this is where your C# code would run. This is where your Java code would run. The data storage tier, this is an important picture because this picture looks like it's a two-tier system. Okay, like there's just one client and one server. But the reality is, most cases, it's a three-tier system. The third tier, well, the client is your first tier. This is called the application server. So they call it the processing tier, but it's the application server where your C# code runs, where your C# code exists. Or maybe it's Java, or maybe it's Ruby. Okay? But this middle tier is called your application tier. And the third tier is called the data storage tier. This is where your SQL will run. This is where your SQL commands will run. Right? And this is ultimately where the data is stored. Okay? So most architectures revolves around a three-tier system, not a two-tier system. The client tier, the application tier or the processing tier, and the database tier. They call it the data storage. Now, everything we've done up until this point, HTML, we've created static documents. JavaScript, I mean, if you want to think about why do we write JavaScript, the main thing is to make your HTML dynamic and gives your web pages interactivity. So it can do something like update the cost of shipping in your shopping cart. So it can work with, I'll give you an example, JavaScript creates cookies. You guys have all heard of cookies in relevance to the web, right? What is a cookie?
Isn't that the thing that, like if you were to fill out your password and username, the cookie is what attaches itself to your password. So
yeah. So it's exactly right. So when you go to a web page and you fill out and it says, should I remember you? And it remembers your username and password. Well, ultimately, that username and password is just stored in a file on your computer. Now that file is encrypted, right? So it's not easily accessed, but it's encrypted on a file on your computer. Okay, that file on your computer is a cookie. That's just a name that they give a file on your computer. I mean, you can think of it as simple as a text file that's encrypted, so you just can't open it up and see all the passwords. Okay, so JavaScript can be used for cookies, so that when you go to a web page, it'll already know if you put maybe your username, it knows your address, it knows your phone number, and things like that. So JavaScript can be used for cookies. And we'll talk about all the different purposes of JavaScript. I just want to give you a couple, okay? But main thing, when you hear JavaScript, burn this into your head, right? JavaScript, just think dynamic. JavaScript, dynamic HTML. That's why they were calling it DHTML. When you add JavaScript, it makes it dynamic. DHTML, dynamic, dynamic, dynamic. Okay, that's what JavaScript is for. Remember, JavaScript runs on the local browser. JavaScript is client-side. It's very important to remember that vanilla JavaScript is client-side. Okay, and it allows web developers to develop interactive web pages. We talked about that. Now, in HTML, your browser itself would read the HTML and render the web page. What that means is draw the web page. So it was Chrome's job to read your HTML and draw the picture that you would see on the screen. Your browsers also have a built-in scripting host, okay? And it's the job of the scripting host to read your JavaScript and execute it, okay? Just like it's the job of the browser to read and draw the picture, it's the scripting host's job to read the JavaScript and execute it. Now here's something, how many people have heard that Google Chrome is faster than Internet Explorer? Have you heard that before? Well, what makes it faster? One of the things for a long time is that its JavaScript interpreter was faster. It would just read JavaScript faster. It was a better piece of software that could read JavaScript faster. That's one of the reasons that Google Chrome was said to be faster than Internet Explorer. It could literally just read JavaScript faster. I mean, think of you reading a textbook compared to your 4-year-old sibling reading a textbook. I would hope you could read it faster, right? Same thing here. Now, and this is more theory than I'm hoping to do, but here's the last thing. I'm going to take a break after I cover the next slide here. JavaScript has versions, right? You guys are familiar with HTML versions, right? We talked about HTML4, evolved into XHTML, evolved into HTML5. Well, the latest version of JavaScript is, we don't even call it JavaScript version 5.1. And I'm not smart enough to know why. At least I don't know why that is. It'd be a lot easier for us to just call it JavaScript 5 or JavaScript 5.1. But we call it ECMA script. Yeah, it's not like we just call it JavaScript 5. We call it ECMA. Or in short, they call it ES. ES script, right? That's ES, right? ES 5.1. Now, let me pull up a little browser here. Now, if I do a Google search for ECMA script, you see the very first result? 6. Okay? So here's, matter of fact, there's even a 7, but Wikipedia has a good explanation of the versionings. Okay, so you can see JavaScript first came around in 97. So what, 20 years ago? Just about 20 years ago. That was edition 1. Edition 2 came out in 98. Edition 3 in 99. Edition 4 they gave up on. Edition 5 they came out with in December of 09. 5.1, this is the edition that we're studying. The edition of JavaScript that we're studying came out in June 2011. Okay, and really it's fully aligned with the 3rd edition, right? So really a lot of what they had in the 3rd edition is a lot of what we are still working with. Okay, now look how recent 6 is, and 7 and 8. They haven't even released it yet. 7, this wasn't here last time I taught this course, right? However, if we look at 6, adds new syntax for writing complex applications, including classes and modules. Let's see. So there are, when I'm referring to vanilla JavaScript, I'm talking about 5.1. When I'm referring to what JavaScript can do more modernly, okay, what can JavaScript do now today that it couldn't do a few years ago, okay, like when we get into the React framework, that's when we're going to start talking about the newer versions, okay. But what we're studying in this class is a foundation for many other languages, okay, and I've talked about this before. JavaScript is used in jQuery. JavaScript is used in Ajax. JavaScript is used in Node. JavaScript is used in Ember. And the list just goes on. The list just goes on and goes on. That's why learning vanilla JavaScript is so important, because so many other languages are based on it. Okay? So I just wanted to share with you these versions, being that we're studying 5.1, but yes, there is a newer version 6. In this particular class, at this point in time, we will study that at the end of the class, but it's not going to be the focus of the class. The focus of the class is going to be learning basic old vanilla JavaScript. Okay. The limitations of JavaScript, what can it not do? Well, JavaScript runs in a web browser. Remember that script interpreter I said? That runs in a web browser. So it's not like you can run an executable, a .exe, and it's going to have JavaScript. Okay, executables are a different language entirely. And JavaScript cannot run system commands like shutdown.exe. Do you know there's a shutdown.exe? Right? There's a remote shutdown. There's a whole bunch of system commands at the command prompt that you could run. ipconfig, ping, tracer, all of those system commands. JavaScript cannot do that either. Okay, we'll go ahead and take a break here. We'll go about Okay, so we are just back from a short break. Finishing up this, and I told my class, I said I'm getting excited because I'm getting to the point where we can write some code. So I like this theory stuff. It's good to know. You'll be tested over it, so might as well talk about it. But I want to write some code. Server-side languages, and if we haven't talked about it enough, some of the languages that run on the server side are PHP, ASP.NET, Python, Ruby. One of the biggest things that a server-side language does that vanilla JavaScript does not is interact with the database. Okay? You will find out that a lot of the things that we do in JavaScript, you can do different ways. You could do some of it with a server-side language, right? So the functionality overlaps. Some of the things we do with JavaScript, you can do with HTML and CSS. Okay? So some of the things, again, are not exclusive to JavaScript. But something that JavaScript doesn't do that server-side languages do is communicate with the database. Well, that's actually quite a lot, communicating with the database. E-commerce sites, websites with logins, any site that saves your conversation, like think of Facebook and you're chatting back and forth, all that chat log is saved somewhere. It's saved to a database. So databases are so fundamental to the web that most websites are even given, they even call it data-driven websites. There's that little term that I really like in our industry, data-driven websites. Think of Amazon. Anybody ever buy anything on Amazon?
Yeah.
What'd you buy? You bought a game. So then you went back to Amazon and you logged in. Did it have suggestions for you? What types of suggestions? More games, other games. It might say, hey, you bought this book. Other users who bought that book also bought this fancy bookmark. See? And they're using data-driven decisions to display certain things on your page. JavaScript can't work with databases. At least ES5.1, vanilla JavaScript, right? The newer stuff can work with databases. Pretty big difference. But the stuff we're studying here does not. Now, some of the things that JavaScript can do, the server-side language cannot manipulate a web browser. How many of you have ever seen a pop-up before? A pop-up window. Everyone's seen a pop-up window. JavaScript creates pop-up windows. Yeah. Yes, they do. And server-side languages do not run on the client. Remember, we talked about the benefits of offloading the work to the client. Okay, that's what companies are doing nowadays. They're saying all this work has to be processed somewhere. Let's have it processed on the client because it's cheaper for us. Okay, and you know, this, I don't know why it went back to a two-tier application. Typically, when you have a server-side language, that's that application server that was back on that 3-tier. I don't really necessarily like this as much, this picture as much, because it's typically a 3-tier system working with databases. This book gives you a general recommendation, so what needs to happen at each location. They say let the JavaScript handle the user interface in light processing like data validation. What's data validation? What are they talking about there? Think about on a website, what's data validation? Yeah, the email thing, right? Making sure you have an email address that's formatted properly. Making sure you didn't forget to put in your middle initial.
fake credit card or something like
fake
that.
credit card number, things like that. Exactly. So they say do the data validation in JavaScript. So realize that's another function of JavaScript. JavaScript can validate your forms. Have the web server perform intensive calculations and data storage. Okay, and again, that's changing a little bit with the latest version of ES6. I like this bullet right here because this is still very true today. It's important to perform as much processing as possible on the client. That's a very important bullet. That's why we're going to get into those different like React frameworks and things like that. Okay, now we're getting into writing some JavaScript. So this is pretty much 26 on. I'm going to try and just write some code. I will tell you guys something here, that for the written test, I hope that wasn't on the recording. That's funny. There's going to be a lot of terms. There's going to be a lot of terms in this chapter. My recommendation is note cards. Okay? Just get a little note card, memorize it, like it's first semester all over again. Didn't you guys use note cards a lot in first semester?
No.
Okay.
No. He gave it to us though.
You had the option to use it?
Yes.
Okay, there you go. He encouraged it even.
We about to write some Java.
So I'm going to write some JavaScript. JavaScript, not Java. Yep. I'm going to save this to my desktop. I'm just going to call this a demo. Okay. One of the first things I'll do is I'll just open up a script tag. Now, did you see how I almost said text CSS? Clearly, we're not writing CSS, so don't put CSS here if you do. I've seen that break. I've seen that break your JavaScript. Excuse me. So make sure we start writing JavaScript with a script tag. Start writing JavaScript by opening a script tag. And one of the first couple of methods that we'll learn is document.write. Now, back on the PowerPoint, we learned this one term it's called an object, and an object is treated as an individual unit or component. Okay. Well, in this case, our HTML document is an object. Okay. So here's kind of some notes here. If I were taking notes, document is an object that represents the HTML document. Right? It represents your HTML. So when I say document, that references the HTML that we're going to be working with here. It references your HTML document. So just some terminology again. Object. Well, document is an object that references an individual unit or component, like your HTML document. Okay? Now, a method is a procedure associated with an object. So, well, procedure was already defined. A procedure is used to perform specific tasks. Okay? So a procedure used to perform specific tasks will write is our procedure. So document is an object that represents the HTML document. Write is a procedure, and it says used to perform a specific task. Well, what specific task? That writes to the HTML document. Matter of fact, I can put HTML in here. Check this out. Okay, so all I have here is a document.write. Document is our object. Write is our procedure that writes HTML to the document. If I launch this,
I'm sorry, say that one more time, please.
sure. There you can see our H1. Document is an object that references our HTML document. Write is our procedure that puts the HTML that you write into the document. Okay? So that's kind of in programming, our first program is always a very simple hello world program.
So,
And that's what we have here. Yeah.
so the document is, you said it references the HTML, so is it like a link to the HTML, or you can write HTML?
It means you could just write HTML in the document.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we're gonna use this object to put things into the HTML and to read things out of the HTML. Okay, right now we're just putting something into it using write.
So will read be read?
No, unfortunately, it's not as simple as that. Although I wish it was. Okay, and if I do another, now I'm gonna take off my H1 tag. I'm gonna say hello world, and I'm gonna do another document.write, and I'll just say hello again. And I'm gonna launch this real quick, and I'm gonna show you a difference between a couple of methods. You see how they're on the same line? Okay, there's a separate procedure that causes a line break. Write ln. Write line, in other words. Okay? So really the only difference between write and write ln is one causes a line break, whereas the other one does not. Okay?
So what are the benefits of using this outside, like in JavaScript instead of HTML?
Okay, so the question becomes, why wouldn't I just use this writing HTML? That's what the question is. At this point, we haven't learned anything about making it dynamic yet. Okay, but I want you to imagine rolling over a picture and then changing the HTML that's around the picture. Okay, we haven't quite gotten into that interactivity yet, how you can make it dynamic, but this is step one before we do that, if that makes sense.
That didn't cause a line break, it just caused a space. So that's what you were referring to?
Yeah.
You're right, that didn't cause a line break. It's supposed to. Huh?
Sure it's LN. Or is it supposed to go to the next one?
Let me put it on both. Although it's not supposed to make a difference. I'll tell you, in other programming languages, it actually works. But it's not working for me right now in JavaScript. That's okay. You know the main thing here, if you want to cause a line break, you know how to do it. Put a BR tag. See, there we go. Introduce your HTML. And if you inspect the page, just out of curiosity, just to inspect the page, you see hello world, separated by a BR, and a hello again. I'm not gonna worry too much about why it didn't cause a line break without the BR. Let me see. I think in the book, anytime they write a write line, they're also going to write a tag that causes the line to happen. So I'm just glancing at some examples from the book. If it does cause a line break, they actually include a tag that causes the line break. Besides, it's not good to just have random floating text in your document. They need to be all surrounded by. They all need to be surrounded by tags anyways.
So basically, we're writing HTML and JavaScript.
At this point, that is correct. At this point, all we're doing is we're statically writing HTML in our JavaScript. Nothing's dynamic at this point because, again, we're just learning to do step 1. Okay? Now, in JavaScript, you see this is our HTML comment, right? And you guys know how to write HTML comments. In JavaScript, we got multi-line comments like this. Okay. We also have single line comment in JavaScript. Right. Yep. And we've always talked about the importance of documenting your code. And sorry, lost my train of thought there. Watch. Is everything okay? Okay.
Doing my car stuff.
Okay. I'll highlight the importance here. It's not just for you writing code, although it definitely helps. If you write a whole bunch of JavaScript, 6 months later, do you think you're going to remember everything that you wrote and why you wrote it that way? So even if you're only documenting for your own sanity and only to help yourself, that's one thing. But let alone if you write some code and then someone else has to read your code and interpret what it's doing. Comments are very important. Now, I'm going to try something else. I'm going to try let's just try this. See if our objects can be capital all caps like that.
No.
Didn't work. Okay? So JavaScript is case sensitive. Definitely case sensitive. Let's see if I just capitalize the first. Let's just see if I just capitalize the first. I need to stop closing my browser. Doesn't work. Okay? So our objects are lowercase. Do you think that would work? Document? It would not. Still doesn't work. Now it works. Let me spell it right. So it's case sensitive. It is absolutely case sensitive. It is absolutely you have to spell things correctly. So it's sensitive to your ability to spell. Your spelling bee, whatever. Okay. Did you notice how I didn't put a semicolon here? And it still worked. Okay. Semicolons in JavaScript are like periods in English. Okay. They end your statements. Okay. They terminate your statements. However, in JavaScript specifically, they're just recommended. Okay. So best practice, absolutely. Will it work if you don't include them? Yes. But I want you to think of a paragraph without any periods. Okay, just one big, long, run-on sentence. What makes it easier to read when you have the punctuation? So definitely include them as best practice. Next thing that's worth talking about are JavaScript variables. What's a variable in math? What is a variable in math?
X and Y.
X and Y.
Value. Oh,
Yeah, they hold values, right? They hold numbers. 1 second here. So a variable is an important concept, and I'm pretty sure, no, it's not on our list of terms yet. So you guys have seen an object, you've seen a procedure. Now a method is something that's used to perform a specific task. I'm sorry, methods are procedures associated with an object. So my terminology was backwards there. I don't know if anyone caught that before now.
Yeah,
But-
we're human.
Thank you. Is a method. So write is a method that writes to the HTML document. So write and write-line are methods, whereas procedures are not associated with objects.
So document is a procedure, right?
We'll show you procedures here in a second. Okay, so now that we fixed my mistake, because write and write-line are methods. We have not dealt with a procedure at this point. But just realize a procedure, these things, different languages, you call them different things, right? You can call it a procedure, you can call it a method, you could call it a function. Really what it is a block of code that executes
Which part
a block of code, right? You just give a block of code a name, and that's what a method is, and that's what a procedure is. A method is just associated with an object, a procedure is not. A property is a piece of data, very similar to a variable, okay? An argument is another piece of data, but you provide that piece of data to a method. So remember, a method back here is a procedure associated with an object. So I'll give you an example of an argument. Okay, remember we've got the document object, we've got the write method, and then an argument is information that must be provided to a method. So going back to our demonstration, document is your object, write and write-line are your methods, our arguments are what goes inside of these quotes. Okay, this is an argument. It goes inside of the method. Okay, so this terminology is a little strange at first, but that's what an argument is. It's a piece of information that must be provided to a method. And then passing arguments, that's what we're doing here, is when we give this argument to the write method, that's said to be passing an argument. Okay, so that's just some terminology, but now let's write a variable. You guys said, like in math, you had the variable x, right? So this is how we declare a variable named x. Okay? And what this does is this creates a spot in our RAM, in our computer's memory, to hold a piece of information. Okay? And we just give it the name of x. Now, x isn't a good name because what, like maybe first name. Okay, that's a good named variable because you know what data is going to be held inside of it. Okay, but x, you typically don't know what type of data is being held in x. Yeah.
So this is similar to like the IDs in classes. We should know where we're getting the specific cases that you're talking about.
It helps. Yes. Yes. Okay. So the terminology that I'm using here, we're declaring a variable named x. Now we're going to assign a value to the variable first name. First name equals Bob. So when working with variables, first off, just a, I think I've said this already, but a variable holds a piece of data. It could hold a name, it can hold a number, it could hold a value like true or false, okay? But a variable holds a piece of information. You declare that variable, and then you assign it, and then you can use it. I'll put a H2 on here. Then I'll add a plus, our variable, plus more HTML.
So you don't have to put anything in front of the variable, like a dollar sign or anything?
Nope. Nope. Just put the variable, there it is. And there's our variable. Now, a variable, I mean, its name kind of says it all. The data typically varies, right? That's the idea behind a variable, is that each time you run the program, it might hold a different value. So if you, Muhammad, if you run the program, first name variable might hold your name, right? But then if Lakia ran it, then the first name variable might hold his name, and Seth, and so on and so forth. Okay, Neil, and I'll go around the room. But the whole idea behind a variable is that it's not a constant piece of information. Each time you run the program, it might hold a different piece of data. Okay? Give a couple other examples of variables.
You did 2 plus. Well, what is the 2 plus signs for?
Well, the plus sign, good question. What is the plus sign here?
Add.
Yeah, it's just like adding. Like you're adding the variable first name to the markup, which is the H2.
But you have on both sides.
I have it on both sides because that's the syntax. It has, anytime you have a variable, there's a plus on the front end and a plus on the back end.
So if I was trying to add 2 variables, I would have 4
Uh,
plus signs.
okay, let's do that. Okay, Bob, and then let's do var age. Now, age equals. You notice when I have letters, I put those letters inside of double quotes. Okay. If I have a number, I just assign it directly. I don't put it inside of quotes.
So you don't have to put a semicolon behind the Bob?
Again, it's best practice to do that. It's best practice to include a semicolon. Now, if I say Bob is, see, I put the plus on both sides of it here as well. And this will say Bob is 33. Now, do you see the spacing errors here? Bob is.
Can you do quotation?
So how would I fix that?
These two without
Just put
anything.
is and yeah,
Space
right.
in.
Just put a space right in front of the word is. Save it. Save it. And now you see it fixes it. Okay, so these are working with variables. Some variables are string or some are whole numbers. Now here's, if you want to shorten it up, var so you can, this is declaring and assigning all on the same line.
So how would we change it so like
This will say Bob plus, we'll add a little space in here. So this will say Bob space, and then we'll say last name. So make sure I got this right. Got a plus here, before and after. Got a plus before and after. Got a plus before and after. Must have a typo in here somewhere. Let's see. It must not like the line break that I put. Now this is good because this gives me an example on showing how to troubleshoot when something is broke. Okay, if I inspect the code here and I go to console, it says last name is not defined.
So it's in the very.
Oh.
Do you see the typo?
Mhm.
Where's the typo?
You put the,
It's not capitalized.
It's not capitalized. There we go. Last name.
Oh, there it comes.
And you put the.
There you go. Now it says Bob Gibson is 33.
You put the variable and the defining it in the variable section.
Did I do something else wrong?
Well, it's kind of like a syntax error, really.
Oh, you're saying yeah, so this in its own, this could be declare and assign. Okay? But it wasn't mad at me if I did it like that. That should still work, and there it does.
So how would you be able to use HTML to like put two input boxes that
We're getting
allow
there.
them to-
We're getting there. Give me a minute to get there, okay?
So what if you have two variables, two consecutive variables like written to the document? Would you need to put two plus marks between both of them, like put the first variable?
What you could do is var first name, comma, middle name. Is that what you're asking?
No, on the right line, the dot right line.
On the right line?
Like if you had two variables consecutive.
Oh, well, we had two variables consecutive here, but I just wanted to include a space in between them. But if you just wanted two consecutive variables,
Yeah, those
it would just be like that. Yep, that would work. It just wouldn't be a space between the first and last name.
Yeah.
So I put a space between the first and last name.
Those colons or whatever they are, they're space, right? They're for space.
Yeah, this is there for spacing to separate the first and last name. Okay, you can do math, right? So age is 33. Var days alive equals age times.
Oh no.
Yep. So your age is 33 years, and in each year there's 365 days, right? So Bob has been alive of 33 times 365. If I open up a calculator, you take 33 times 365, 12,045 days. So
You didn't define days alive, though, did you?
I did right here. I declared it right here,
Oh,
and I assigned it on the same line. Okay, so I declared our variable days alive is equal to the age times 365. So if I include that in here, and I said, and has been alive days alive,
so in that other variable, you used another variable, right?
yeah. So I use the calculation. I could say 33 here, right?
But
But
you don't
that's
know.
representative of the age.
Okay. So whatever they put in.
So whatever they put in, yeah. There you go. Bob Gibson is 33 and has been alive 1245 days. I should finish it off and say, you see the mistake again? 1245 days. Well, do you see the mistake here? You see how the variable and what goes inside of the quotes is called a string. Okay, so that's an important term to remember. See how my variable and my string run together? So to separate them out, we're going to add space right there.
would you be able to do that with the space inside the variable?
No. Nope. Has to be inside of my string, not inside of the variable. Okay, so that covers your basics on variables. The next thing is, notice this script went in the HTML head. Really not best practice. Best practice is to put your script at the bottom of your body. So I'm going to cut my script out here and put it at the bottom of my HTML body.
And you have it externally as well.
Even better than putting it here is putting it externally. Okay, and I'll do that next. I'll just show you take that script, put it in the body, it still works. Okay? I'll also show you you can have multiple script tags. I do that all the time.
So,
And if I just do a document.write, thank you.
what would happen if you had JavaScript up there and down and out down at the bottom?
That's what I'm gonna demonstrate it both. Okay. So here, this is gonna say script section 1. This is gonna be in an H1 tag. Okay, so we have script section 1, and then we have all this stuff here, which was script section 2. You see how, much like CSS, all the script sections come together to modify your document and to work on your document. Okay, and the comment that I had from Nathan was you can also have external JavaScript. So you can have an external JavaScript file, which is really the best way. Much like you're working with CSS, it's best to work externally, because that way you can write logic and then just save it in an external file and then use it across multiple sites. If you're putting it into the actual HTML page, that's not as reusable as if it were in an external document. So I'll do a file, new document, file, save as. I'm just saving my demo to my desktop. So I'll say external.js. Okay, and I'll just do a var I'll just call it para for my paragraph equals, this is a paragraph, because it's going to have
Can you make a variable? You can make a variable
2,
equal string, right? That's what you're doing.
3, 4, 5. Yeah, I'm making a variable string. And if I do a documents.write, okay, it's not working because we haven't linked to our external JavaScript. So the next thing becomes, how do we link to our external JavaScript? After our second section, I'll go ahead and link to our JavaScript, which is still with the script tag, same type, text JavaScript. Now we've got a source. And external.js. And we still need a closing script tag. And there you can see, this is the script in our head, this is the script in our body, and then this is our external JavaScript. But if we want to move this, we could move it here. And I think I put it inside of a comment. Oh, I put That was a bad spot. I put it inside of another script tag. What did I do? Let me undo some things here. Okay.
What happened to that comment box?
Yeah, I don't know why that comment keeps doing that. It's like every time I save it, messes with it. There we go. Okay, so that's our external.
So it first rendered the first section and then it did the external. How come it didn't finish rendering the bottom section?
It still did. This is the bottom section right here.
I'm saying though, since the bottom and the first are on the same page, how come it didn't do?
So it did the first script section first, then it did the external, because it's just the order that it came in, top to bottom.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So
The
you
last
did-
thing worth demonstrating is the C data tag. When you're writing this HTML, and now you're introducing JavaScript. So you're introducing JavaScript for the first time. Your HTML is going to look at that JavaScript and freak out. Okay, your HTML will not validate. So if you're trying to validate your code, so there's a simple tag that you can introduce around your JavaScript so that the HTML validator doesn't hate it. And that's the C data tag. And I'm going to take out this comment because it's kind of breaking everything. And let me show you what the C data tag looks like. That's a typo there. So really all I do with C data is I'm going to wrap all my JavaScript in this funky looking tag. So again, this C data tag right here, it's a very strange looking tag. And it's going to help you validate your HTML. Okay? That's really its only purpose, is to put it so that your HTML will validate.
Is the second bracket supposed to be an open bracket?
Yeah, so it goes angle bracket, exclamation point, bracket, C data bracket, that's correct. And then down here, it's bracket, bracket, angle bracket. Okay, and that's C data. And really that brings us just to the end of chapter 1. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording here, and you guys can work on your homework for tonight.
Oh man.